The hundreds of grain transport ships belonging to the Shen family, which are stationed along the Grand Canal across the country, all proceed into the capital, sell the new grain to the entire city at 30% below the market rate. I want the grain prices in this capital to crash. Within a single hour after the order was given, the dominoes began to fall. In less than half a day, a massive amount of grain flooded the city market. The previously inflated prices plummeted instantly, falling even below the lowest points of previous years. The grain hoarded by Xiao Qihan's henchmen has instantly become worthless waste in their hands. The banks are coming to collect their debts, and the deficit in the Ministry of Revenue's treasury can no longer be hidden. Late at night, the shadow guards returned with more good news. My lady, those upright officials of the censorate have received the evidence we sent them in secret. At this morning's court session, 18 petitions were submitted at once, impeaching the 6th prince for forming factions, manipulating market prices, and embezzling from the national treasury. The emperor was furious, and has already ordered the 6th prince stripped of his authority to oversee the 6 ministries, and confined to his residence for a thorough investigation. Hearing the news that Xiao Qihan had fallen into such a desperate state, I felt no stirrings in my heart. Using the rules of trade to deal with men who only understand power plays was nothing more than child's play. However, just as I was preparing to return to my room to rest, a very faint yet rhythmic sound of armor clanking drifted in from the darkness outside the villa. I flung the window open and saw in the woods outside the suburban villa countless cold, flickering torches igniting. A black commander's banner, embroidered with the character snapped violently in the night wind. General Gu Yunting of the Genuan army, with his 1,000 elite personal guards, had silently surrounded my villa like a fortress. Bang! The heavy Nanmu wooden doors of the main courtyard were brutally kicked open. Wood splinters flew everywhere. I sat composed in my armchair, not even lifting an eyelid. I continued to steadily brew the freshly acquired Yuqian Longjing tea with my clay teapot. Gu Yunting strode across the threshold, his heavy black iron armor still carrying the chill of the night dew. His deep eyes burned with possessiveness and irritation. Shen Qingqi, you truly have clever schemes. That even the 6th prince was toyed with in the palm of your hand. Gu Yunting sneered, and drew the long sword at his waist with a backhand motion. The tip of his sword pointed straight at my throat. Don't try to use money to pressure me. With the 6th prince having fallen in this capital city now, only I can protect you. He leaned down, his gaze becoming incredibly brazen. I have made up my mind. Instead of racking my brains to get your consent, it would be better to simply force the issue. Tonight, I will ruin your virtue. For the sake of your reputation, you will have no choice but to be my woman. The Shen family fortune will naturally be absorbed into my general's estate. Hearing such shameless talk, dressing up rape in such a grand manner, my stomach churned with revulsion. This is what these so-called elites are like. Once their masks are torn off, all that remains is primitive savagery and greed. Seeing him reach out to tear at my clothes, I did not dodge. Instead, I took the initiative to lift the purple clay teapot and poured a cup of hot tea. Since the general intends to stay a while in this villa, you might as well have a cup of tea to warm yourself. I pushed the teacup toward him, the corners of my mouth curling into a faint smile. Gu Yinting paused. He looked at my eerily calm face, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes, seemingly believing that I had already accepted my fate. He reached out and picked up the teacup, about to drain it in one gulp. Just at that moment, a gust of night wind blew through the courtyard. Gu Yunting's brows knit together sharply. He stopped his movement and sniffed the air hard. What is this smell? He looked around vigilantly. I watched as only cold, murderous intent remained in his eyes. General, having spent years on the battlefield, can you really not smell it? That isn't the scent of flowers. It is the incredibly pungent scent of saltpeter mixed with sulfur. Gu Yunting's face turned ghastly pale in an instant. The instinct of one who has walked the edge of life and death for years made him lunge backward. You've buried gunpowder in the courtyard. A trace of terror finally seeped into his voice. I slowly stood up and gracefully pulled a delicate Western-style match from my sleeve. A faint light flared in the dim room, illuminating my face. To be precise, it is 5,000 pounds of black powder. Long before I entered the capital, I had hoarded these supplies under the guise of mining. All of it is buried beneath this estate. The fuse is right beneath my feet. Hearing 5,000 pounds, that number. Gu Yunting's pupils constricted violently. He knew all too well that once such a massive quantity of gunpowder detonated, everything within a half-mile radius, including him and the 1,000 elite troops outside, would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Are you insane? If you detonate it, you will die as well. Gu Yunting roared, yet he dared not take a single step forward. My mother taught me, when the wolves are hunting you, you must never show weakness. I let out a cold laugh and tilted the match in my hand an inch closer to the fuse on the ground. The general's cavalry is indeed fierce, but tell me, which is faster, your blade or my spark? Since the general insists on dragging me to hell, then we shall all perish together. The spark fell, and the exposed segment of the fuse ignited instantly, emitting a scalp-tingling, hissing sound. The sparks raced rapidly underground. Stop! Gu Yinting's mental defenses collapsed completely. Cold sweat instantly soaked through his heavy armor. He had always assumed women were selfish with their lives, and weak, never imagining I would dare to take him down with me. Retreat. Full retreat. Gu Yunting stumbled and scrambled out the door, roaring frantically at his soldiers outside the courtyard. Once his pathetic, retreating figure vanished into the night, I lifted my foot and stomped precisely on the fuse that was about to burn out. I collapsed into the armchair, completely drained, my palms already soaked in cold sweat. Whoever fears death the least is the one who holds the power. In this game of wits, I had won. However, just as I finally let out a sigh of relief, a faint whistling sound cut through the night air. I whipped my head up and saw a cold arrow glimmering with a ghastly blue light, fired from a blind spot outside the courtyard wall, aimed straight for my heart. It was a poisoned arrow shot in spite by Gu Yunting as he retreated. It was too close. There was no time for me to dodge. In that split second of mortal danger, a figure in green flashed from the shadows like an immortal. I heard the dull, sickening thud of flesh being pierced. Mo Yuan, who had been hiding in the dark, had used his own body to shield me from the blow. The poisoned arrow pierced his shoulder blade, and blood instantly stained his pale green robes. Mo Yuan's tall frame lurched violently, and he collapsed heavily at my feet. I saw his face turn ghostly pale in an instant, bright red blood gushing out along the arrow shaft. A shocking sight. I froze where I stood, my mind momentarily blank. I couldn't understand why this scholar, whom I had only met a few times, would risk his life to save me. Mo Yuan mustered the last of his strength, not asking for credit, not even groaning in pain, but struggling to reach out and push me away. Miss Shen, go quickly. It is not safe here. Don't let this tainted blood stain your dress. Hearing those words, so faint, yet so restrained, the impenetrable iceberg in my heart felt as if it had been struck hard. After the secret guards arrived and secured the area, I immediately used all the precious medicines of the Shen family, even boiling century-old ginseng like radishes in soup, just to keep Mo Yuan alive. During the half-month that Mo Yuan was unconscious, I guarded his bedside day and night. After he woke up, we had countless conversations. He talked about business strategies. He talked about the world and his profound insights. His understanding of the hardships women face in business made me admire him all the more. Qingxi, the world says you are consumed by greed, but in my eyes, you are the most brilliant pearl in this world. I, Mo Yuan, have no other desires in this life, only to spend my life with you alone. Looking into his gentle, water-like eyes, the defenses in my heart gradually loosened. He even ignored his injuries and signed a contract right in front of me. I am willing to marry into the Shen family and forfeit all inheritance rights to the Shen family's assets. If I break this vow, may heaven and earth destroy me. Looking at that contract in black and white, the high wall in my heart finally collapsed completely. I thought I had finally met someone who truly understood me. 3 months later, while preparations for our wedding were underway, I sat in my study, checking the list of betrothal gifts Mo Yuan had sent. Although they were all inexpensive ancient books and paintings, I still looked through them very carefully. Just then, my fingertips suddenly brushed against the edge of a piece of paper. The texture of the paper was extremely unusual, bearing a subtle, imperceptible resilience. I held the paper up to the sunlight, and vaguely could see extremely intricate watermarks inside the paper. It was clearly the 2 dragons playing with a pearl pattern. My heart sank to the very bottom. This was paper supplied exclusively to the imperial household by the Bureau of Internal Affairs. A poor scholar from a humble background. How could he possibly possess such a thing? I didn't make a sound, and I certainly didn't take the paper to confront Mo Yuan. Once confronted, he would surely have countless excuses to brush it off. I needed solid, concrete evidence. After nightfall, I secretly summoned the supreme leader of the Shadow Pavilion. I activated the Grade A intelligence network, sparing no expense even if it cost 100,000 taels of silver. I wanted every single expenditure of Mo Yuan's over the last 10 years investigated, every one of his movements, and even every word he had ever spoken. I lowered my voice, my tone filled with a bone-chilling coldness. 3 days later, reports gathered in my secret chamber like snowflakes. Looking at the clues pieced together on the table, a chill raced from the soles of my feet straight to my scalp. The Shadow Pavilion discovered that Mo Yuan's so-called humble hometown did not exist at all. The people in the village were all hired actors. The antique inkstone he had casually gifted me had once been recorded in the Imperial Archives as a tribute item. What was even more damning was that he had intricate and highly secretive financial dealings with the powerful official at court, who consistently advocated for crushing the merchant class of Jiangnian. In order to obtain the core evidence, taking advantage of the time Mo Yuan was out, I personally snuck into his study. I have always been sensitive to mechanisms. That Duan inkstone he often used to grind ink had a base that was slightly thicker than a normal one. I pressed the edge of the inkstone, and sure enough, I felt a hidden compartment. Opening the hidden compartment, inside lay a letter written in code. I quickly deciphered the contents of the letter. When I saw the bright red seal at the bottom of the letter, my breath hitched sharply. It was the private seal of the current crown prince. Just then, I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside the door. "Ching Si, are you in there?" Moyan's gentle voice rang out from beyond the door. My hands remained as steady as still water, without the slightest tremor. With lightning speed, I folded the secret letter and returned it to its place, closed the hidden compartment, and set the inkstone back just as it was. The door creaked open. Moyan walked in, carrying a steaming bowl of calming soup. He looked at me, his gaze as soft and gentle as ever. "It is late. Why are you still reading? Be careful not to exhaust yourself." Upon hearing his words filled with such concern, I turned around, a flawless smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. I reached out to take the soup, and the moment our fingertips touched, I felt as if I had brushed against the scales of a viper. "It's nothing. I was just looking for a rare book to read." "Thank you, my husband." The water clock dripped steadily in the dead of night. I sat alone in the cold, hidden room and reviewed every event of the past 6 months, from beginning to end. Why did Xiao Qihan collapse severely wounded at the Shen residence gates? It was because the crown prince sent assassins after him. Why was Gu Yunting able to issue the precise new tax decree for Jiangnian merchants? It was because the crown prince pulled strings at court. Even the incident with the spooked horse and that poisoned arrow Gu Yunting fired were all meticulously calculated by the crown prince. His goal was for Mo Yuan, as my life-saving benefactor, to enter my life. He blocked an arrow for me, signed a marriage contract to move into my home, and offered the utmost tenderness, all just to make me lower my defenses and willingly hand over everything the Shen family owns. It was a trap carefully woven, and I nearly became the fool who fell for it. Having understood all this, there are no tears in my heart, only the extreme fury of having been fooled. I silently opened the scroll my mother left behind, the survival guide to tormenting novels. On the final blank page, I bit my finger and wrote a line in blood. When a wolf dons sheep's clothing, one must skin it and strip it of its bones. By the time dawn broke, there were only 15 days left until the grand wedding. I acted more deeply in love than ever, and even offered to include the master ledgers of the Shen family treasury as my dowry, handing them over to Mo Yuan for review ahead of time. "My husband, the Shen family's holdings are vast. As a fragile woman, I simply cannot manage them alone. These ledgers will have to rely on you to handle them from now on." I leaned into Mo Yuan's arms, my tone delicate, silent. I looked up, staring directly into Gu Yunting's furious eyes. "General Gi Yu, since we are talking about repaying a kindness, let us settle the accounts clearly. A small sedan chair is meant to clear the debt of my Shen family. Your kindness is a bit too cheap." The beads of the solid gold abacus danced under my fingertips, making a crisp clatter sound. The sound was jarringly sharp in the quiet of the estate entrance. "I don't deal in sentiments. I only calculate concrete debts. General Gi Yu, what my Shen family did for you 10 years ago was far more than just a single meal. Back then, you were being hunted by enemies. My father not only provided you with premium medicinal herbs, which included 3 ounces of century-old ginseng slices, according to the market rates of that time. The ginseng alone was worth 500 taels of silver. I continued to slide the beads on the abacus. More importantly, my family provided cover for you, shielding you from the official search and arrest. This risk calculated by the survival rates of the Jiangnan black market, was worth at least 5,000 taels. Hearing this, General Go's face turned ash gray. He gripped his horsewhip tightly. I did not stop. My fingers danced rapidly across the abacus. Loans in the Great Zhou merchant houses have always used compound interest calculations, commonly known as interest on interest, entering the original principle of 5,500 taels from 10 years ago into the formula, plus the inflation over the past decade, and my family's average annual return on investment of 20%. The sound of the abacus stopped abruptly. I looked up. To deliver the final verdict, the total principal and interest combined 108,000 taels of silver. In consideration of your service in protecting the country and your hard work, I'll round it down for you. 100,000 taels. Payable in full immediately. The air turned deathly silent. Everyone gasped at the staggering figure. General Guiyu flew into a rage, suddenly raising his whip to point at me, reeking of copper coins. How dare you leverage a favor for personal gain and extort an imperial official? Facing his fury, I didn't retreat one bit, my words as sharp as a blade. General, since you despise the smell of money so much, then why would you want to take a merchant's daughter reeking of copper into your manor? Or is it that you have your eyes on my Shen family's vast fortune and wish to use the title of a concubine to swindle me and use my dowry to fund your military expenses? Cornered by my airtight logic, Gu Yinting's face turned from pale to livid. He could not come up with 100,000 taels, nor could he refute my questioning. In the end, he glared at me with gnashing teeth, and completely humiliated, he pulled on his reins. Shen Qingqi, you just wait. After Gu Yinting retreated in disgrace with his personal guards, I coldly put away my golden abacus. However, that very afternoon, the doorman handed over another invitation, this one delicately scented. The capital's renowned, talented woman, Gu Yinting's childhood sweetheart, Su Wanru, under the guise of enjoying the lotus flowers, stepped through the gates of the Shen manor. Su Wanru was dressed in white pristine as snow, walking into the Shen garden with a delicate swaying grace. On the surface, she came to persuade me not to anger the general, but in reality, every word mocked my merchant background, suppressing me with both overt and subtle digs. We strolled along the edge of the lotus pond, as a gentle breeze blew by, carrying the scent of lotus blossoms. Sister Shen, do you have any idea how prestigious the general is in the capital? A merchant family is, after all, somewhat lowly. If you are sensible, sister, and voluntarily hand over part of your family fortune to the general for military funds to help relieve his urgent needs. She stopped in her tracks, looking at me with a condescending gaze. I might be magnanimous enough to beg the general to allow you to enter the house as a mere chambermaid. Listening to her manipulative, tea-sipping mannerisms, I felt she was nothing more than a ridiculous clown. There was no point in continuing this dialogue that traps me in self-justification. I intentionally kept a step's distance from her. Miss Su, you are joking. The Shen family's money never leaves my hands, I replied indifferently, and prepared to turn and leave. Just then, seeing that her verbal barbs had failed to provoke me, Su Wanru's eyes suddenly turned cold. We happened to be walking along a section of the lotus pond without a railing. I saw her suddenly reach out, grabbing my sleeve with a death grip. Immediately following, she threw herself backward, plunging into the icy water with a splash. Help! Sister Shen, why did you push me? Su Wanru thrashed in the water, calling out loudly for help, her voice shrill and desperate. At almost the exact same moment, Gu Yunting, who had been hiding in the shadows, rushed out. It was clear she had intentionally lured him here. Gu Yunting dove into the water without a moment's hesitation, rescuing the soaking wet, shivering Su Wanru from the water. He pulled her into his arms, then spun around to glare at me furiously. Vicious woman, Wanru came with good intentions to advise you, yet you would stoop to such a wicked deed. Faced with Gu Yinting's accusations and Su Wanru's sobbing, I felt no panic whatsoever. I did not cry out. It wasn't me, nor did I rush to defend myself. When Su Wanru grabbed my sleeve, her fingers were locked in an incredibly tight grip, yet her body was leaning backward. This did not look like being pushed at all. This was clearly a premeditated frame-up. I leisurely brushed the water droplets off my sleeve and ordered my steward Shen Fu, who stood behind me, seal off the area immediately. No one is to approach the edge of the pond. I cast a sharp, commanding glance at Gu Yunting. Send word to bring the city's finest forensic examiner, along with a master of calculations and an artist. Tell them I want them here within the time it takes to burn 1 stick of incense, equipped with their full set of tools. 1 stick of incense later, several professionals carrying toolboxes hurried to the Shen family's back garden. Gu Yinting held Su Wanru in his arms, his face full of disdain, thinking I was merely putting on a show. Meanwhile, Suwanru trembled in the general's arms, a hint of secret triumph hidden in her eyes. However, once the investigation officially began, the atmosphere shifted completely. The mathematician took a measuring tape and compass and approached the edge of the pond based on the spot where Miss Sue fell and the scratches on the moss by the bank. There are only outward sliding marks on this moss, and no signs of a struggle. If pushed by external force, there would certainly be deep marks where feet braced against the ground. This perfectly matches the trajectory analysis of a voluntary backward fall. Immediately after, the forensic examiner stepped forward and offered a respectful bow. "Miss Sue, please hold out your hands." Sue Wanru's face changed slightly, shrinking back into Gu Yunting's arms, refusing to reach out. Gu Yunting roared, "What do you think you're doing?" I spoke coldly. "What's wrong? Is Miss Sue afraid to be examined?" The examiner forcibly inspected Sue Wanru's fingernails, then carefully examined my wrinkled sleeve. "Report to the young lady. There are no fabric fibers under Miss Sue's fingernails, and the direction of the tears in your fabric shows the force was applied from bottom to top. This proves Miss Sue initiated the pull and caused her own downward movement. If it were a push, the point of force would never be here." Meanwhile, the artist had already illustrated the direction of force, the position, and the trajectory of the fall into a detailed reconstruction diagram. The material evidence was indisputable and fit perfectly together. Taking the diagrams and the forensic report, I walked up to the two pale figures. "This is just a scheme you paid to have staged. Who would believe these scribbles?" Hearing this absurd and desperate lie, my gaze turned sharp as a blade. Under the Great Joe Code, false accusations will be met with the same penalty. I have already sent people to strike the appeal drum with this evidence. "Miss Sue, are you prepared to compose poetry in prison?" Struck dumb by my professional evidence, I slapped her pride down on the spot. Sue Wanru's legs gave way in terror, collapsing to the ground instantly. She couldn't even manage a cry. Gu Yunting's protective impulse instantly turned into a total joke. He stared in shock at the guilty woman in his arms, unable to say a single word. After driving that pair of scoundrels away, I stood by the pool, keenly sensing a looming crisis. Whether it was that man claiming to be my fiancé or Gu Yunting, both had the backing of the imperial court, with the iron rule that merchants must not cross officials hanging over my head. For the Shen family to survive, I must proactively enter the game and seize power. However, the retaliation arrived faster than I imagined. Half a month later, an abrupt new Jiangnan commercial tax decree was issued. Nominally, this decree was intended to fill the national treasury, but every clause was precisely targeted at the Shen family's silk, salt, and tea production. Anyone with eyes could see this was a calculated suppression. That man had been slighted in Jiangnan, and Gu Yunting held a grudge over the 100,000 taels I demanded. One man had influence in the imperial court, the other held military power. It was only natural that they would join forces against the Shen family. It was entirely expected. In just a few days, officials frequently sealed our shops under the guise of tax audits. Half of the Shen family's businesses were forced to close. The elders began to panic again, gathering in the council hall, desperately begging me to bow down and seek peace with General Jiu. Qingxi, commoners cannot fight officials. We are no match for the imperial court. Listening to their laments, I didn't get angry but instead smiled. I immediately summoned the key shopkeepers to a secret room, pointed to the map of the Great Zhou territory on the wall, and dissected the critical points. The imperial court is about to send troops, and they need the Shen family's money, but they have miscalculated who truly controls the economic lifeline of the Jiangnan region. Since they are not playing by the rules and are using legal loopholes to suppress the Shen family, then we shall seize them by their own vital point. We will not resist the taxes, but we will monopolize the shipping capacity. That very night, I quietly invested a massive sum, buying out all the shipping rights for the next 3 months via secret channels. And I covertly drove up the price of timber used for boat repairs. The Jiangnan Canal shipping is the lifeline for the capital's winter grain and military supplies. Once the waterways are choked off, they will naturally start to panic. 3 days later, the local prefect arrived, flaunting his power as he inspected the Shen family's shuttered shops. He looked full of arrogance, expecting me to fall to my knees and beg for mercy. Instead, I sat in the grand armchair, calmly brewing fresh tea. "My lord, the autumn floods are coming soon. The capital's winter grain and military supplies, if, because of Jiangnan, shipping capacity proves insufficient, and if the boat repairs are delayed and never arrive, I wonder if your official cap will still be secure on your head." Upon hearing this, the prefect's hand holding the teacup suddenly shook. Scalding tea spilled onto the back of his hand, but he didn't even notice. He realized my meaning in an instant. I had used the sheer scale of my capital to seize the transport jugular of the entire bureaucratic system. "You, how dare you threaten the imperial court?" Cold sweat streamed down the prefect's face. I would not dare sir. I am merely conducting business according to the rules." After the prefect left, looking thoroughly dejected, the first alliance between those two men had been effortlessly dismantled by my purely commercial methods. That night, I haggled with the old foxes of the Chamber of Commerce until late before returning to the manor. Just as the carriage passed through the bustling market, the horses pulling the carriage suddenly let out a shrill, piercing cry and began to charge forward frantically, and directly ahead stood a massive, sturdy stone archway. The carriage jolted violently. I gripped the window frame for dear life. My stomach churned in turmoil. "Hold on, miss," the coachman shouted in terror from outside. It looked as though the carriage would crash into the archway, ending in certain death and destruction. In that split second of mortal danger, through the lifted carriage curtain, I saw a blue-clad figure flash by. There was no exaggerated swooping save, nor any click-shed heroics. A scholar in blue robes stood at the street corner, and with movements of incredible precision, flicked a stone from his fingertips. The stone struck the exact pressure point on the startled horse's left front leg. The horse let out a sorrowful neigh. Its front knees gave way, and it collapsed to the ground with a thud. My guards took the opportunity to step forward, pulling hard on the reins, and brought the situation under control. Still shaken, I stepped down from the carriage. The scholar in blue was graceful and refined, with a perfect sense of propriety. He didn't take the chance to strike up a conversation, nor did he even ask my name. He simply handed me a clean, plain handkerchief, offered a slight nod, and turned to leave. Watching his departing silhouette, a sense of calm settled over me. Too many in this world save others only to demand favors in return. His restrained sense of boundaries lowered my defenses significantly. The next day, at the Jiangnan Chamber of Commerce tea house, I accidentally overheard someone holding court in the next booth. I recognized that voice at once. It was the very scholar who had saved me last night. His name was Mo Yuan. He was debating the flaws of the new commercial tax with someone. His insights were so profound and hit right at the heart of the matter. "The world says Miss Shen reeks of money," Mo Yuan said with a smile, sipping his tea. "But in my view, that is the backbone sustaining the livelihoods of hundreds of thousands in Jiangnan. The hardships of a woman in business are 100 times greater than a man's. They should be treated with respect." Hearing this, my heart skipped a beat. In this day and age, most men look down on women who work in trade, let alone understand the hardships they face. His words, however, truly resonated with me. For the first time in my life, I felt the appreciation of meeting an intellectual equal, but having seen so much duplicity in my lifetime, even though I had some fondness for him, I dared not open my heart easily. I could only keep it to myself and observe him quietly. After I returned to the Shen Manor, the fleeting warmth I had just felt was instantly shattered. My maid Chuntao came running over in tears, clutching a letter in her hand. "Eldest Miss, it is terrible. Miss Warner stole the madam's jewelry, left a farewell note, and eloped with that penniless scholar." Upon hearing this news, the world went black before my eyes, and fury surged to my head. I sat upright in the main seat of the Shen Manor's hall, slowly fidgeting with that solid gold abacus in my hand. Hearing rapid footsteps outside the door, I lifted my gaze. The scout from the Shadow Pavilion knelt on one knee, presenting a secret report with both hands. "Eldest Miss, over at Miss Warner's side, they are nearing their breaking point." Hearing this, my fingers, which had been clicking the abacus, paused slightly. 3 months ago, Lin Warner stole her aunt's jewelry and left a farewell letter filled with, "Love is enough to survive on." Then eloped with a penniless scholar named Chen Shimei. I knew then that the hardest affliction to cure in this world is the stupidity of blindly trusting a man's sweet talk. I had intended to let her suffer a bit, which is why I delayed intervening. "Saddle the horses." I uttered these 2 words coldly. "Saddle the horses," I said coldly. When we reached the dilapidated farmhouse on the outskirts of the city, I didn't go in right away. Through the half-open gate, I saw that in the muddy yard, Warner was crouching by the well. The once luxurious shoe silk dress she wore was now unrecognizable in color, covered in grime and patches. The wind was bitingly cold, and her hands, which had never done a day's work in her life, were now covered in frostbite, as she soaked them in freezing water, scrubbing a pile of foul-smelling men's clothing. In a broken bamboo basket beside her sat a few bitter wild greens. Seeing this, the head of my guard standing behind me tightened his grip on his sword hilt, asking in a low voice, "My lady, should we move in?" I raised my hand to silence him. I want this bitterness to be carved deep into Warner's marrow, so she remembers it for the rest of her life. Just then, the door to the main room was kicked open. That scholar Chen, wearing a faded gown, stumbled out. reeking of alcohol. Seeing Warner stop working, he charged straight at her and landed a harsh slap across her face. "You wretch. You're so slow even at washing clothes. I am a man of status and scholarship. I go out every day to rub shoulders with the powerful. What would a merchant's daughter like you know? It is a blessing from your past lives that you get to serve me." Hearing such shameless words, the frost in my eyes deepened. Warner held her swollen red cheek, shivering as she wept. "Husband, there is no food left in the house. Yesterday you took my last jade hairpin, saying you were going to buy books. Why? Why did you go to the Spring Breeze Pavilion? Insolent woman." Scholar Chen kicked Warner to the ground. "As for a scholar's business, would you call visiting the Spring Breeze Pavilion going? That is to recite poetry and discuss literature." Just then, a gaudily dressed madam emerged from the room, holding a contract in her hand. I heard the madam laugh in a shrill voice. "Scholar Chen, this young lady may be a bit thin, but her features are quite fine. Sell her to our Spring Breeze Pavilion to be a singer, and your gambling debt of 30 taels will be cleared." Upon hearing this, Lin Wan air trembled violently, staring in disbelief at the man she once thought she could trust with her life. "Husband, you are selling me." Warner's voice was shrill with despair. "What are you wailing about? It is an honor for a cheap life like yours to pay off my debts." As Scholar Chen spoke, he reached out to grab Warner by the hair. Warner closed her eyes in despair, tears streaming down mixed with the mud. At this moment, she finally recalled my past warnings. Thinking of this, my patience was completely exhausted. In the next second, I raised my gold-embroidered silk slipper, aiming it at the dilapidated, shaky door, and kicked it with all my might. Bang! With a deafening sound, the wooden door splintered to pieces, accompanied by a dozen sword-wielding guards and 2 top-tier lawyers. Stepping over the flying wood chips, I entered the filthy courtyard. "Who dares to touch a member of my Shen family?" My frigid voice instantly silenced everything in the courtyard. Scholar Chen and the madam stood frozen in shock by the sudden display of force. When Scholar Chen realized it was me, he tried to maintain his scholar's dignity and blustered with a forced ferocity. "Shen Qingqi, bringing these vulgar brutes to break into a private home. What do you think you're doing? This is a private matter of the Chen household. I am a scholar with a formal degree. I do not kneel before officials. You dare lay a hand on me." Hearing this bluster, I found it beneath me to even look at him. I turned my head slightly and gave a look to the head guard behind me. Upon receiving the order, 2 guards rushed forward immediately. They kicked Scholar Chen behind the knees, and with a sickening crack of bone, Scholar Chen let out a shrill scream. As he was pinned firmly into the mud, his face, once so full of self-importance, was forced to make intimate contact with the chicken manure on the ground. I walked slowly to where he lay and looked down upon him from above. Article 372 of the Great Zhou Penal Code. Those who forge documents to embezzle the property of others shall receive 80 strokes of the heavy cane and be exiled 3,000 miles. Those who beat a respectable woman and cause serious injury shall be sentenced to 3 years of penal servitude. Counselor Zhang read it to him. The counselor behind me stepped forward at once, unfolding a thick ledger. He began to recite in a booming voice. When Lin Wanner left the estate, she carried with her 1 set of solid gold jewelry inlaid with rubies, a pair of top-grade mutton fat jade bracelets, and gold and silver bullion totaling 1,200 taels. According to the Great Zhou mercantile depreciation laws and the compound interest rate of 9 in 13 out, Chen Shimei owes the Shen family a total of 4,680 taels of silver. Pay up now. Upon hearing that number, Scholar Chen was so terrified he couldn't even control his bladder. A yellow liquid seeped down his trouser leg, releasing a foul stench. I don't have the money. She gave it to me voluntarily." He struggled wildly and shouted, "No money." I sneered, pulling a pre-written divorce decree from my sleeve and throwing it in his face. "For every copper coin you are short, I will cut off one of your fingers. Sign it. Press your thumbprint here, and I will let you keep your miserable life." Under the threat of the bared steel blades held by the guards, Scholar Chen trembled as he bit his finger and pressed a bloody thumbprint onto the divorce papers. Once that was settled, I walked over to Warner, who was huddled in the corner. She was staring at me blankly, as if looking at some sort of deity. I did not reach out to help her up, but instead snatched a thick wooden staff from one of the guards and threw it at her feet. "Warner, see it clearly. This is the so-called love you traded your dignity for. Tears are the most useless things of all. Pick up the staff and break his leg. From this day on, your life belongs to the Shen family. If you don't have the courage, I am leaving now." Hearing my words, Lin Warner looked at the staff on the ground, then at Scholar Chen, who was begging for mercy in the mud like a maggot. The cowardice in her eyes gradually faded, replaced by a deep absolute hatred. She suddenly grabbed the staff, and with every ounce of strength she had, brought brought it down hard on Scholar Chen's right leg, accompanied by a shriek that sounded like a dying pig. Scholar Chen passed out cold. Seeing this, I finally curled my lips in satisfaction, took off my fox fur cloak, draped it over Warner's trembling shoulders, and turned to walk out of the courtyard. No sooner had I stepped onto the carriage to head home than the steward rushed toward me with a panicked expression. "Young mistress, something terrible has happened. An urgent report has arrived from the capital. That stray man who was taken away by the bailiffs. No, Master Xiao. He is actually the 6th prince of the dynasty Xiao Qihan. He has reclaimed his identity and issued an emergency decree by express courier, ordering the head of the Shen family to report to the capital immediately." Upon hearing this, I leaned back against the carriage cushions. A hint of mockery flashed in my eyes. The real storm was finally arriving. The capital's city walls stood tall and imposing, permeated with the oppressive aura of imperial power. As soon as the Shen family's merchant caravan entered the capital, before I could even settle into the Shen family's trading house, a squadron of fully armed imperial guards blocked our path like an iron wall. His Highness the 6th Prince has issued an order. The head of the Shen family is to report to the residence for an audience immediately. The leading imperial guard commander kept his hand on his sword, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Seeing this, I knew this was no invitation, but an arrest. I offered no resistance, simply smoothing my sleeves with calm composure, and boarded the carriage headed for the 6th prince's mansion. After passing through numerous corridors, I was led into an extravagantly luxurious main hall. I looked up to see Xiao Qihan seated on the carved sandalwood dragon throne. He was wearing robes embroidered with yellow pythons, and the wet, pathetic, pitiable disguise he wore at the Jiangnan medical clinic was completely gone. In its place was the extreme arrogance and gloom of the imperial family. "Shen Qingqi, why do you not kneel before royalty?" Xiao Qihan looked down at me from above, as if gazing at an ant that could be crushed at any moment. Hearing those oppressive words, I bowed slightly, performing an impeccable merchant's greeting, but I did not kneel. "Commoner Shen Qingxi pays respects to the 6th prince. I have a chronic injury in my knees, commoner that I am, which your highness was aware of back in Jiangnan. I trust that you are broad-minded and will not take offense." I spoke in a flat tone, subtly pointing to his bedraggled state in Jiangnan. Xiao Qihan's eye twitched, and he gave a cold snort. "Shen Qingxi, I did not summon you here today to reminisce. Hand over the master seal of the Jiangnan Merchant Association. Furthermore, surrender 70% of the Shen family assets as my military funding. As long as you are obedient, I can show mercy and grant you the position of a secondary consort. This is a blessing you could never earn in lifetimes of cultivation." Hearing his demands finally laid bare, a wave of intense disgust rose within me. He wants 70% of my family's wealth and expects me to be grateful for the chance to be his concubine. It is simply absurd, but I knew well that I was currently in a tiger's den. A head-on confrontation would only lead to a death sentence. Thinking of this, I quickly concealed the cold glint in my eyes and put on a look of trembling fear. "Your Highness is too generous. I am unworthy of such a favor. However, the Shen family business is vast, and much of our liquid capital is tied up in goods and banks. To raise 70% of the family estate is not something that can be done overnight. I humbly implore your highness for more time. Allow this humble subject to return and make the arrangements." Xiao Qihan stared at me for a long time, as if assessing my sincerity. Finally, he waved his hand arrogantly. "I shall grant you 10 days. 10 days from now, if I do not see the silver and gold, the entire Shen family will be executed." Once I had left the 6th prince's estate, I stepped into my carriage, and the look of subservience vanished from my face. My eyes turned as cold as ice blades. Upon returning to the Shen family villa, I immediately ordered that all information be locked down. I issued orders to the assassins of the Shadow Pavilion. "Go, bring the managers of the top 10 underground banks in the capital, all of them, to the secret cellar, and do it discreetly." Half an hour later, the candlelight in the secret chamber flickered. A dozen head managers looked at me and then at each other. I slammed a thick stack of banknotes onto the table. My voice echoed firmly in the silent room. "Gentlemen, I need you to use every channel at your disposal within 3 days, at any cost, to short the capital's grain market. The autumn wind in the capital now carries a hint of chilling malice. A battle without smoke or gunpowder has quietly begun under my command." Through the window screens of the tea house's second-floor parlor, I watched the long queues forming outside the grain shops below. In just 3 short days, the loose grain at every major merchant in the city has been frantically bought up by mysterious buyers at a 20% markup. I also had the Shadow Pavilion spread rumors that autumn floods are coming, war has erupted in the northern border, and the capital is about to run out of food. These rumors spread through every alleyway. Listening to the chatter on the streets, I took a leisurely sip of my Junshan silver needle tea. "Milady, The fish has taken the bait. The steward hurried up the stairs and reported in a hushed tone. Those greedy, corrupt officials working for the sixth prince, seeing the skyrocketing grain prices, thought there was money to be made. They embezzled funds from the Ministry of Revenue and even took out high-interest loans from underground lenders and are now frantically hoarding supplies. Upon hearing this, I set down my teacup, the corners of my mouth curving into a cold smirk. Greed is the fastest poison for destroying reason. Xiao Qihan thinks he is in control of everything, but he has no idea that his own people are personally driving his financial chain into the abyss. Pass the order down. I stood up, looking down at the bustling streets below. Have the hundreds of grain transport ships belonging to the Shen family, which are stationed along the Grand Canal across the country, all proceed into the capital. Sell the new grain to the entire city at 30% below the market rate. I want the grain prices in this capital to crash. Within a single hour after the order was given, the dominoes began to fall. In less than half a day, a massive amount of grain flooded the city market. The previously inflated prices plummeted instantly, falling even below the lowest points of previous years. The grain hoarded by Xiao Qihan's henchmen has instantly become worthless waste in their hands. The banks are coming to collect their debts, and the deficit in the Ministry of Revenue's treasury can no longer be hidden. Late at night, the shadow guards returned with more good news. My lady, those upright officials of the censorate have received the evidence we sent them in secret. At this morning's court session, 18 petitions were submitted at once, impeaching the sixth prince for forming factions, manipulating market prices, and embezzling from the national treasury. The emperor was furious and has already ordered the sixth prince stripped of his authority to oversee the six ministries and confined to his residence for a thorough investigation. Hearing the news that Xiao Qihan had fallen into such a desperate state, I felt no stirrings in my heart. Using the rules of trade to deal with men who only understand power plays was nothing more than child's play. However, just as I was preparing to return to my room to rest, a very faint yet rhythmic sound of armor clanking drifted in from the darkness outside the villa. I flung the window open and saw in the woods outside the suburban villa countless cold, flickering torches igniting. A black commander's banner, embroidered with the character snapped violently in the night wind. General Gu Yunting of the Genuan Army, with his 1,000 elite personal guards, had silently surrounded my villa like a fortress. Bang! The heavy Nanmu wooden doors of the main courtyard were brutally kicked open. Wood splinters flew everywhere. I sat composed in my armchair, not even lifting an eyelid. I continued to steadily brew the freshly acquired Yuqian Longjing tea with my clay teapot. Gu Yunting strode across the threshold, his heavy black iron armor still carrying the chill of the night dew. His deep eyes burned with possessiveness and irritation. Shen Qingqi, you truly have clever schemes. That even the sixth prince was toyed with in the palm of your hand. Gu Yunting sneered and drew the long sword at his waist with a backhand motion. The tip of his sword pointed straight at my throat. Don't try to use money to pressure me. With the sixth prince having fallen in this capital city now, only I can protect you. He leaned down, his gaze becoming incredibly brazen. I have made up my mind. Instead of racking my brains to get your consent, it would be better to simply force the issue. Tonight, I will ruin your virtue. For the sake of your reputation, you will have no choice but to be my woman. The Shen family fortune will naturally be absorbed into my general's estate. Hearing such shameless talk, dressing up rape in such a grand manner, my stomach churned with revulsion. This is what these so-called elites are like. Once their masks are torn off, all that remains is primitive savagery and greed. Seeing him reach out to tear at my clothes, I did not dodge. Instead, I took the initiative to lift the purple clay teapot and poured a cup of hot tea. Since the general intends to stay a while in this villa, you might as well have a cup of tea to warm yourself. I pushed the teacup toward him, the corners of my mouth curling into a faint smile. Gu Yinting paused. He looked at my eerily calm face, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes. Seemingly believing that I had already accepted my fate, he reached out and picked up the teacup, about to drain it in one gulp. Just at that moment, a gust of night wind blew through the courtyard. Gu Yunting's brows knit together sharply. He stopped his movement and sniffed the air hard. What is this smell? He looked around vigilantly. I watched as only cold, murderous intent remained in his eyes. General, having spent years on the battlefield, can you really not smell it? That isn't the scent of flowers. It is the incredibly pungent scent of saltpeter mixed with sulfur. Gu Yunting's face turned ghastly pale in an instant. The instinct of one who has walked the edge of life and death for years made him lunge backward. You've buried gunpowder in the courtyard. A trace of terror finally seeped into his voice. I slowly stood up and gracefully pulled a delicate Western-style match from my sleeve. A faint light flared in the dim room. illuminating my face. To be precise, it is 5,000 pounds of black powder. Long before I entered the capital, I had hoarded these supplies under the guise of mining. All of it is buried beneath this estate. The fuse is right beneath my feet. Hearing 5,000 pounds, that number. Gu Yunting's pupils constricted violently. He knew all too well that once such a massive quantity of gunpowder detonated, everything within a half-mile radius, including him and the 1,000 elite troops outside, would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Are you insane? If you detonate it, you will die as well. Gu Yunting roared, yet he dared not take a single step forward. My mother taught me, when the wolves are hunting you, you must never show weakness. I let out a cold laugh and tilted the match in my hand an inch closer to the fuse on the ground. The general's cavalry is indeed fierce, but tell me, which is faster, your blade or my spark? Since the general insists on dragging me to hell, then we shall all perish together. The spark fell, and the exposed segment of the fuse ignited instantly, emitting a scalp-tingling, hissing sound. The sparks raced rapidly underground. Stop! Gu Yunting's mental defenses collapsed completely. Cold sweat instantly soaked through his heavy armor. He had always assumed women were selfish with their lives, and weak, never imagining I would dare to take him down with me. Retreat. Full retreat. Gu Yunting stumbled and scrambled out the door, roaring frantically at his soldiers outside the courtyard. Once his pathetic, retreating figure vanished into the night, I lifted my foot and stomped precisely on the fuse that was about to burn out. I collapsed into the armchair, completely drained, my palms already soaked in cold sweat. Whoever fears death the least is the one who holds the power. In this game of wits, I had won. However, just as I finally let out a sigh of relief, a faint whistling sound cut through the night air. I whipped my head up and saw a cold arrow glimmering with a ghastly blue light, fired from a blind spot outside the courtyard wall, aimed straight for my heart. It was a poisoned arrow shot in spite by Gu Yunting as he retreated. It was too close. There was no time for me to dodge. In that split second of mortal danger, a figure in green flashed from the shadows like an immortal. I heard the dull, sickening thud of flesh being pierced. Mo Yuan, who had been hiding in the dark, had used his own body to shield me from the blow. The poisoned arrow pierced his shoulder blade, and blood instantly stained his pale green robes. Mo Yuan's tall frame lurched violently, and he collapsed heavily at my feet. I saw his face turn ghostly pale in an instant, bright red blood gushing out along the arrow shaft. A shocking sight. I froze where I stood, my mind momentarily blank. I couldn't understand why this scholar, whom I had only met a few times, would risk his life to save me. Mo Yuan mustered the last of his strength, not asking for credit, not even groaning in pain, but struggling to reach out and push me away. Miss Shen, go quickly. It is not safe here. Don't let this tainted blood stain your dress. Hearing those words, so faint, yet so restrained, the impenetrable iceberg in my heart felt as if it had been struck hard. After the secret guards arrived and secured the area, I immediately used all the precious medicines of the Shen family, even boiling century-old ginseng like radishes in soup, just to keep Mo Yuan alive. During the half-month that Mo Yuan was unconscious, I guarded his bedside day and night. After he woke up, we had countless conversations. He talked about business strategies. He talked about the world and his profound insights. His understanding of the hardships women face in business made me admire him all the more. Qingxi, the world says you are consumed by greed, but in my eyes, you are the most brilliant pearl in this world. I, Mo Yuan, have no other desires in this life, only to spend my life with you alone. Looking into his gentle, water-like eyes, the defenses in my heart gradually loosened. He even ignored his injuries and signed a contract right in front of me. I am willing to marry into the Shen family and forfeit all inheritance rights to the Shen family's assets. If I break this vow, may heaven and earth destroy me. Looking at that contract in black and white, the high wall in my heart finally collapsed completely. I thought I had finally met someone who truly understood me. 3 months later, while preparations for our wedding were underway, I sat in my study, checking the list of betrothal gifts Mo Yuan had sent. Although they were all inexpensive ancient books and paintings, I still looked through them very carefully. Just then, my fingertips suddenly brushed against the edge of a piece of paper. The texture of the paper was extremely unusual, bearing a subtle, imperceptible resilience. I held the paper up to the sunlight and vaguely could see extremely intricate watermarks inside the paper. It was clearly the two dragons playing with a pearl pattern. My heart sank to the very bottom. This was paper supplied exclusively to the imperial household by the Bureau of Internal Affairs. A poor scholar from a humble background. How could he possibly possess such a thing? I didn't make a sound, and I certainly didn't take the paper to confront Mo Yuan. Once confronted, he would surely have countless excuses to brush it off. I needed solid, concrete evidence. After nightfall, I secretly summoned the supreme leader of the Shadow Pavilion. I activated the Grade A intelligence network, sparing no expense even if it cost 100,000 taels of silver. I wanted every single expenditure of Mo Yuan's over the last 10 years investigated, every one of his movements, and even every word he had ever spoken. I lowered my voice, my tone filled with a bone-chilling coldness. 3 days later, reports gathered in my secret chamber like snowflakes. Looking at the clues pieced together on the table, a chill raced from the soles of my feet straight to my scalp. The Shadow Pavilion discovered that Mo Yuan's so-called humble hometown did not exist at all. The people in the village were all hired actors. The antique inkstone he had casually gifted me had once been recorded in the Imperial Archives as a tribute item. What was even more damning was that he had intricate and highly secretive financial dealings with the powerful official at court, who consistently advocated for crushing the merchant class of Jiangnian. In order to obtain the core evidence, taking advantage of the time Mo Yuan was out, I personally snuck into his study. I have always been sensitive to mechanisms. That Duan inkstone he often used to grind ink had a base that was slightly thicker than a normal one. I pressed the edge of the inkstone, and sure enough, I felt a hidden compartment. Opening the hidden compartment, inside lay a letter written in code. I quickly deciphered the contents of the letter when I saw the bright red seal at the bottom of the letter. My breath hitched sharply. It was the private seal of the current crown prince. Just then, I heard the faint sound of footsteps outside the door. "Ching Si, are you in there?" Moyan's gentle voice rang out from beyond the door. My hands remained as steady as still water, without the slightest tremor. With lightning speed, I folded the secret letter and returned it to its place, closed the hidden compartment, and set the inkstone back just as it was. The door creaked open. Moyan walked in, carrying a steaming bowl of calming soup. He looked at me, his gaze as soft and gentle as ever. "It is late. Why are you still reading? Be careful not to exhaust yourself." Upon hearing his words filled with such concern, I turned around, a flawless smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. I reached out to take the soup, and the moment our fingertips touched, I felt as if I had brushed against the scales of a viper. "It's nothing. I was just looking for a rare book to read." "Thank you, my husband." The water clock dripped steadily in the dead of night. I sat alone in the cold, hidden room and reviewed every event of the past 6 months, from beginning to end. Why did Xiao Qihan collapse severely wounded at the Shen residence gates? It was because the crown prince sent assassins after him. Why was Gu Yunting able to issue the precise new tax decree for Jiangnian merchants? It was because the crown prince pulled strings at court. Even the incident with the spooked horse and that poisoned arrow Gu Yunting fired were all meticulously calculated by the crown prince. His goal was for Mo Yuan, as my life-saving benefactor, to enter my life. He blocked an arrow for me, signed a marriage contract to move into my home, and offered the utmost tenderness, all just to make me lower my defenses and willingly hand over everything the Shen family owns. It was a trap carefully woven, and I nearly became the fool who fell for it. Having understood all this, there are no tears in my heart, only the extreme fury of having been fooled. I silently opened the scroll my mother left behind, the survival guide to tormenting novels. On the final blank page, I bit my finger and wrote a line in blood. When a wolf dons sheep's clothing, one must skin it and strip it of its bones. By the time dawn broke, there were only 15 days left until the grand wedding. I acted more deeply in love than ever, and even offered to include the master ledgers of the Shen family treasury as my dowry, handing them over to Mo Yuan for review ahead of time. "My husband, the Shen family's holdings are vast. As a fragile woman, I simply cannot manage them alone. These ledgers will have to rely on you to handle them from now on." I leaned into Mo Yuan's arms, my tone delicate and tender, playing the role he wanted to see. Upon hearing my words, a flicker of undisguised greed and pity flashed in Mo Yuan's eyes. He patted my back gently. "Don't worry, Qingxi. I will take care of everything." He thought he had everything under control. Little did he know, while he was busy flipping through those ledgers, a massive transfer of assets was already underway in secret underground banks and at the midnight docks. Beginning in a frenzy, I registered dozens of overseas shell companies through fake trade deals and highly inflated procurement costs. All of the prime shops, assets and properties, cash and deeds belonging to the Shen family were legally and compliantly transferred out of the Great Zhou borders. Crates of real gold and silver were disguised as ballast and shipped overseas overnight. Not only was I going to hollow him out, I was also going to leave him a massive mess. Leveraging the century-old reputation of the Shen family under the guise of expanding business, I took out huge high-interest loans from major capital banks, wealthy families in Jiangnan, and even through hidden channels from the imperial treasury itself, borrowed massive amounts of high-interest loans, and these debts enough to crush an entire family were all cleverly tied to the Shen family's main accounts. Once everything was in place, I looked at the bright red wedding gown brought to me, the corners of my mouth curling into a cold smirk. Mo Yuan pushed the door open. Seeing me in that crimson attire, a glimmer of awe flashed in his eyes. He walked up to me, looking at the last few account books I had just finished handing over. Qingxi, after tomorrow, there will be no more yours or mine between us. Mo Yuan affectionately kissed my forehead, his tone dripping with the triumph of a winner. The burden on your shoulders. From this day forward, I will carry it. Hearing this affectionate promise, I looked up, staring straight into his hypocritical eyes, smiling with a beauty that could topple kingdoms. Yet my eyes remained ice-cold. Good, your highness must be sure to carry it well. This was my final warning to him, and the ultimate irony, he thinks he is about to inherit a mountain of gold, never imagining that what he is about to take over is a bottomless pit of debt. And I will personally drag this high and mighty crown prince into an inescapable hell. Before the morning light had fully pierced the clouds, the Shen manor was already a buzz of noise. I sat upright before the carved rosewood vanity, allowing the matron to place that heavy phoenix crown upon my hair. The woman reflected in the copper mirror had cold, sharp eyes and lips stained with vermilion. The bright red wedding gown was embroidered with gold thread in an intricate phoenix pattern. This gown was commissioned by Mo Yuan at a great cost. He once said he would make me the most glorious crown princess in the world. Hearing the festive music from outside, a cold, heartless curve touched my lips. A death guard from the shadow pavilion appeared silently behind the screen, kneeling on one knee. I waved for all the maids and attendants to leave the room. My lady, the final shipment of merchant vessels loaded with silver departed the Great Zhou waters at midnight yesterday, arriving safely at the Ryukyu Islands. The loan agreements from the 12 major banks of Jiangnan, along with that high-interest debt of 3 million taels from the Imperial Household Department, have all been transferred under the name of the head of the Shen household. The guard reported in a hushed tone. Upon hearing this, I idly toyed with a pure gold hairpin with kingfisher feathers. The sharp tip grazed lightly against my fingertip. Make sure it is done cleanly. After today, within the borders of Great Zhou, there will not be a single cent of the Shen family's wealth left. Your subordinate understands. Once the guard bowed and retreated, I stood up slowly. The heavy wedding gown dragged across the polished bluestone floor, emitting a faint, rustling sound. I touched the small book I carried inside my sleeve. Survival Guide for Tragic Romance Novels. Mother, the lessons you taught me, your daughter has not forgotten for a single moment. Those who seek to scheme against me will eventually pay the price. The auspicious hour has arrived. I lowered the red veil embroidered with mandarin ducks over my face and stepped out of the manor, supported by my attendant. With my vision blocked, I could only perceive my surroundings through sound. I heard the gasps of the townspeople along the streets. I heard the cacophony of firecrackers ringing out, and I heard the voice of Mo Yuan, who sat upon a tall horse masquerading as a gentleman of grace. Qingxi, mind your step. Mo Yuan's warm hand grasped my forearm through my sleeve. Feeling the pressure from his fingertips, I felt a sudden wave of nausea. This man took 3 months, exhausting the most perfect tenderness in the world, to weave an inescapable web around me. If I hadn't held firm to my, trusting only in interests and never in human nature, as my bottom line, I fear I would have already become meat on his chopping block by now. The wedding ceremony was held in the incredibly lavish main hall of the Shen estate. The hall was filled with the most prominent and powerful dignitaries of Jiangnan. First bow to heaven and earth. The master of ceremonies' high-pitched voice echoed through the beams and pillars. I bowed my head submissively. Second bow to your parents. Just as I was about to bow again, a jarring sound of iron armor colliding erupted from outside the gate. Immediately after, the doors were violently kicked open. The muffled crash brought the festive music to an abrupt halt. Countless fully armed Imperial guards flooded into the hall like a black tide. The guests let out shrieks of terror, scrambling backward in a panic. The sound of blades being drawn from their sheaths was deafening in the suddenly quiet hall. Wearing my red bridal veil, I stood silently in place, not even changing the rhythm of my breathing. I have been waiting for this day for far too long. Seize them. A voice that was ice-cold and filled with the authority of a superior rang out beside me. Hearing this familiar yet strange tone, I knew Mo Yuan could no longer keep up the charade. I felt the man beside me rip the red silk flower from his chest and throw it fiercely to the ground. He turned around, facing the terrified crowd of guests, his voice filled with the arrogance of one in absolute control. Hear the decree of the crown prince. The Shen family of Zhongnian have been hoarding goods for profit, colluding with enemy nations, and plotting treason. Seize all of the Shen family's businesses, banks, and the entire Shen clan, and detain them on the spot. A collective gasp rose from the crowd. As I listened to the crimes he fabricated, my heart remained completely still, finding his clumsy excuse almost laughable. In order to swallow up the Shen family, the noble crown prince has actually abandoned all pretense of dignity. Heavy footsteps approached. Mo Yuan walked up to me, looking down at me from his towering height. Though separated by my bridal veil, I could clearly feel the greed and pity in his gaze. Qingxi, it has come to this. The Shen family is finished. Mo Yuan's voice was low, tinged with a hypocritical air of condescension. Given our past history, I will point you toward a path of survival, as long as you immediately mark this confession of guilt and the deed voluntarily forfeiting your family assets. I can spare your life. In the back quarters of the Eastern Palace, I will reserve a position for you as a foot-washing maid. This is your only way to live. With that, a sheet of paper smelling of fresh ink was shoved roughly under my nose. The silence all around was deathly. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the woman once known as the richest in Jiangnan to collapse in tears, or beg for mercy on her knees. However, amidst the suffocating tension, beneath the red veil, I slowly curled the corners of my lips. A soft laugh escaped my lips, sudden and sharp, piercingly clear, instantly breaking the deathly silence of the hall. I slowly raised my hand and tore off the heavy red veil atop my head. The blinding sunlight rushed into my sight. I narrowed my eyes, my gaze colliding directly with Mo Yuan's shocked eyes. Seeing this, Mo Yuan frowned deeply, his face sinking with anger. Shen Qingqi, what are you laughing at? Facing death, you still dare to play tricks in front of me? I ignored his blustering, casually throwing that intricately embroidered red veil into the burning brazier nearby. Flames flared up instantly, devouring the red cloth that symbolized a hypocritical love. The firelight reflected upon my face. I look at him coldly. There is not a trace of fear in my eyes, only the chill of watching prey fall into a trap. His Highness, the Crown Prince, wants the Shen family's assets. Very well. Since your Highness is so impatient, let us finalize the handover right now. After saying this, I tilt my head slightly and raise my voice toward the back hall. Bring all the account books to His Highness. As soon as my words fall, over a dozen of the Shen family's head accountants, escorted by a group of guards, walk into the hall in pairs, carrying 6 extremely heavy iron-bound trunks. As the trunks hit the floor, they make a thunderous bang, making the stone slabs beneath our feet tremble. The trunks are open, revealing mountains of ledgers neatly stacked inside. A flash of frantic greed crosses Mo Yuan's eyes. He immediately turns to look at the accompanying Minister of Revenue. Go, calculate everything for me. Every bit of the Shen family's cash, and all land deeds. Not a single coin is to be overlooked. The Minister of Revenue wipes cold sweat from his brow and scrambles toward the ledgers. His hands tremble as he opens the first book, then opens the second. The only sounds left in the hall are the rapid flipping of pages and the frantic clacking of abacus beads. However, after only the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, I see the Minister of Revenue's complexion turn from rosy to ghastly pale, and finally to a deathly ashen gray. His legs give out, and he collapses right there in the sea of ledgers, shaking like a leaf in the wind. What is going on? Have you finished the calculations? Seeing this scene, Mo Yuan barks the question sharp. The Minister of Revenue swallows hard, his voice raspy like a broken bellows. These accounts are all wrong. What is wrong with it? Does she actually dare to hide assets? I walked slowly toward the trunk, pulled out a ledger at random. Thud, I slammed it down at Mo Yuan's feet. There is no need to trouble yourself, Minister. I shall report to His Highness personally. As of 5 a.m. today, the Shen family's available cash is 0. Furthermore, The Shen family currently owes money to 12 banks in Zhangnan, the 4 wealthiest families in the capital, and even the imperial treasury, totaling 13 million taels of silver. Hearing this, the entire hall erupted in utter shock. 13 million taels. That is equivalent to 3 years of the Great Zhou dynasty's total tax revenue. Mo Yuan looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stumbled back half a step, staring at me intently. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. The Shen family is wealthier than the state. How could they be in debt? Why would it be impossible? I let out a cold laugh, my gaze cutting across his face like a blade. Has your highness forgotten the laws of the Great Zhou? A husband's debts are borne by the wife, and a wife's debts are borne by the husband. Just a moment ago, before the guests and our ancestors, you performed the wedding ceremony with me. From today on, this pile of bad debt amounting to 13 million taels falls squarely upon your shoulders, your highness. Congratulations, your highness, on becoming the greatest debtor in the Great Zhou dynasty. I watched as Mo Yuan's elegant jade-like face instantly contorted, the veins on his forehead bulging, and a sense of absolute triumph surged within me. You bitch, you dare to plot against me? Mo Yuan let out a beast-like roar, suddenly drawing the sword from his waist. The tip pointed straight at my throat, the freezing cold aura of the blade making the hairs on my neck stand up. Facing the cold glint of your blade, I did not take a single step back. Instead, I puffed out my chest and met the tip of the sword. Go ahead, kill me. If you kill me, once the head of the Shen family is dead, the 13 million taels in debt will collapse tomorrow. The Zhangyan financial system will crumble instantly, and the imperial treasury will lose everything. Tell me, do you think His Majesty will grieve for you, the crown prince? Or will he slice you into 1,000 pieces to appease the fury of the empire's merchants? As I said this, I pulled a secret letter stamped with the crown prince's seal from my sleeve and threw it hard into his face. And while I'm at it, as for the evidence of your scheme to seize Shen family property, to cover up the embezzlement of the Yellow River relief funds, I have already sent it to the censorate. Calculate the time, and it should be sitting on His Majesty's desk right about now. Hearing this, Mo Yuan's wrist shook violently. His long sword clattered as it fell to the floor. He stared at the letter on the ground, his eyes finally brimming with utter, desperate terror. The astronomical debt of 13 million taels, added to the ironclad proof of embezzling relief funds, acted like 2 massive bombs, triggering a tidal wave in the imperial court of the capital. The emperor was furious. An urgent imperial decree was issued overnight via express courier. Standing on the high steps of the Shen residence, I watched coldly as the once arrogant crown prince Mo Yuan was stripped of his bright yellow python robe like a stray dog. The armored guards of the imperial clan court were brutal, forcing heavy iron shackles around his neck. Shen Qingqi, I am the heir to the throne. I will not be defeated. Mo Yuan struggled frantically against his chains, roaring at me with bloodshot eyes. Listening to his impotent rage, I didn't even bat an eye. However, a power vacuum always invites the hungry jackals. Just as Mo Yuan was being dragged away, 2 groups of men stormed into the street where the Shen residence is located with extreme arrogance. The leaders of the groups were none other than Xiao Qihan and Gu Yunting. Seeing this, I tucked my hands into my sleeves and watched them dismount in silence. Their faces wore masks of utter hypocrisy. Qingxi, I told you before, the crown prince is a man of wicked intent. Now he is getting what he deserves. Although your Shen family is burdened with massive debt, as long as you are willing to submit to me and hand over the Merchant Association's seal, I will surely protect your life before the emperor. Xiao Qihan flicked his folding fan, his eyes gleaming with the greed of one taking advantage of another's misfortune. Gu Yunting took a step forward, his hand on his sword, his tone arrogant as if he were bestowing a favor. Shen Qingqi, you are a weak woman who cannot handle such a crisis. As long as you agree right now to become a concubine in my general's mansion, my 100,000 troops will be your strongest shield. Those creditors, who would dare demand money from you? Hearing such shameless words from these 2, I could not help but lower my head and chuckle softly. My laughter grew louder until it echoed across the empty street, filled with endless mockery. What are you laughing at? Gu Yunting frowned deeply, a flash of irritation in his eyes. I ceased my laughter, lifted my head, and swept my gaze across their faces as if looking at dead men. I am laughing at you, for at death's door, you are still dreaming of controlling women. I tilted my head slightly and signaled to the butler behind me. The butler immediately stepped forward, holding two exquisite brocade boxes. I pointed to the box on the left and looked at Xiao Qihan. Your Sixth Highness, the ledger records of you abusing your power to sell military horses to the enemy nation of Wara from the northwest border are right here. Do you suppose, if His Majesty knew that for the sake of the throne, you would sell out the Great Zhou's border defenses, what manner of death he would decree for you? Hearing this, the smug look on Xiao Qihan's face instantly froze, and the folding fan in his hand dropped to the ground with a thud. I did not give him a chance to catch his breath, and turned my gaze to the brocade box on the right, locking my eyes onto Gu Yunting. General Gi Yu, your battle report for the victory at Yanmen Pass last year was truly well written. What a pity that the mass grave where you slaughtered innocent citizens to pass off their heads as those of enemy soldiers has already been excavated by my men. Those hundreds of petitions marked with blood-stained fingerprints are being presented to His Majesty by the Censorate's most adamant critics at this very moment. Hearing this, Gu Yunting's burly frame jolted violently, and his complexion turned deathly pale in an instant. He instinctively reached for his sword. You poisonous woman, I will kill you. Just try laying a finger on her. A thunderous, authoritative roar echoed from the end of the long street. A vast troop of Jinyaiwei descended like divine warriors, surrounding Xiao Qihan and Gu Yunting completely. The commander of the Jinyaiwei stepped forward and unfurled the imperial decree, his voice as cold as ice. By the order of the emperor, heaven mandated and prosperous, the sixth prince, Xiao Qihan, has trafficked in military supplies, and General Genyuan Gu Yunting has slaughtered civilians to claim false military merit. The evidence is irrefutable. Both are hereby stripped of their noble titles, thrown into the imperial prison to await their fate. Watching as the two were roughly disarmed by the Jinyaiwei and clamped in irons, I slowly walked down the steps to stand before three prisoner wagons parked in a line. Inside the wagons were Mo Yuan, Xiao Qihan, and Gu Yunting. These three men who once stood so high above, who treated my fate as a plaything and the Shen family fortune as their own plunder, were now all reduced to prisoners. They stared at me intensely, their eyes filled with resentment, humiliation, and deep, profound fear. I stood outside the prison wagons, looking at their wretched state, and spoke softly. Do you really think this world revolves around you? I, Shen Qingxi, do not believe in fate, do not believe in gods, and certainly do not believe in men. If you want to take advantage of the Shen family, then you must be prepared for the consequences. Having said that, I turned away resolutely, never looking back once. 6 months later, in the capital, at the marketplace execution grounds, heavy snow fell like goose feathers, and the biting wind lashed ruthlessly against everyone's cheeks. The world was a vast expanse of white, except for those patches of dark red blood in the center, which looked particularly harrowing. Today is the day the grave offenders are sold off. I sat in an incredibly luxurious pure gold carriage, holding a hand warmer, and through the crystal window, watched the scene at the execution ground coldly. The once arrogant Crown Prince Mo Yuan, the sixth Prince Xiao Qihan, and General Gu Yunting were now kneeling in the muddy snow-covered ground in rags. The long imprisonment and harsh torture had long since crushed their pride. Gu Yunting's hands and feet were chapped from the cold, with fresh blood seeping out and staining his tattered prison uniform. Xiao Qihan's once handsome face was now marked with a hideous whip scar, and he was shivering violently from the cold. As for Mo Yuan, the most skilled at deception, he was now disheveled and unkempt, his eyes vacant and desperate. The human trafficker brandished a barbed whip, and with a sharp crack struck Gu Yunting's back, shouting loudly, "Everyone, look here. These three may be condemned criminals, but they have good frames. Buy them for manual labor, and they'd be perfect for hauling night soil. 10 taels of silver each. Who wants them?" The onlookers pointed and whispered, but no one dared to step forward. Who would dare buy criminals who offended the emperor? Listening to the slave traders shouting and the trio's muffled groans, I set aside my hand warmer and tapped lightly against the carriage wall. The carriage door opened. 2 rows of well-trained guards quickly unrolled an exquisite Persian carpet, extending it all the way to the center of the execution grounds. Dressed in a snow-white fox fur coat, I stepped onto the solid gold footstool and slowly descended from the carriage. Seeing this, the once noisy marketplace instantly fell silent. Everyone's gaze was fixed upon me. I walked over to the 3 men, looking down at them from above. Hearing the faint sound of footsteps, Mo Yuan sluggishly raised his head. When he caught sight of my face, a surge of intense humiliation and fury erupted in his dead gray eyes. He struggled to stand up, but was dragged back to the ground by his heavy iron shackles. "Shen Qingqi, have you come to watch us make fools of ourselves?" Mo Yuan gritted his teeth, his voice as raspy as sandpaper rubbing together. I ignored him and turned to look at the obsequious slave trader. These 3. I'm buying them. My tone was flat, as if I were discussing 3 heads of cabbage. With that, I reached into my sleeve and pulled out 3 ingots of poor quality, mud-stained silver, and tossed them casually in front of them. The silver rolled across the icy ground, making a piercing sound. 3 coins of silver for a lifelong contract, branded with the Shen family slave mark. Upon hearing this insulting price, Xiao Qihan lifted his head abruptly, roaring with bloodshot eyes. Shen Qingqi, how dare you try to buy me with a mere 3 coins? You are insulting the imperial house. The imperial house, I sneered, my gaze filled with utter contempt. You are nothing but a commoner stripped of your royal status. 3 coins. To buy the lives of the 3 of you is more than I care to spend. Witnessing my expressionless face, Gu Yunting bit his lip hard, blood trickling down the corner of his mouth. He attempted to use his former authority to intimidate me. Shen Qingxi, a true gentleman would rather die than be humiliated. If you have the guts, kill me right now. Kill you? That would be letting you off too easily. I walked slowly toward Mo Yuan. He was staring at me with such malice, as if he wanted to tear me apart alive. Shen Qingqi, you will have a miserable death, he cursed. I gave a light chuckle, suddenly lifting my embroidered slipper and stepping precisely onto his spine. Then, I applied force suddenly. Bang! I slammed Mo Yuan's face into the freezing snow. Muddy slush filled his mouth and nose instantly. He struggled desperately, but could not move even a fraction. I leaned down slightly, my voice cold as ice. What kind of gentleman are you? You are nothing more than a worthless, damaged piece of merchandise. From now on, your lives belong to me. Take them away. 3 years later, the Shen mansion in Zhongnan, a sharp crack of a whip rang out from the servants' quarters. Snap, you useless waste. You can't even chop a piece of wood properly. Did you waste all the food at the general's manor? My cousin Lin Wanner gripped a barbed leather whip and lashed it mercilessly across the bare back of Gu Yunting. Hearing the crack of the whip, I lifted my gaze slightly, my eyes passing through the moon gate to clearly see the scene in the servants' courtyard. The once imperious great general of Genuan, Gu Yunting, was now drenched in sweat, covered in scars. He gritted his teeth, hoisting a heavy axe with both hands, chopping at the mountain of firewood before him with mechanical precision. At the slightest pause, Wanner's whip would descend without a hint of mercy. After 3 years of tempering, Wanner was no longer the lovesick girl who easily trusted men, but the iron-fisted head housekeeper of the Shen Manor. In a corner building on the other side of the courtyard, Xiao Qihan, wearing heavy shackles, sat before a stack of towering account books. You miscalculated. This shipment of Ryukyu spices is off by 3 copper coins. The accountant beside him rapped his desk sternly. Seeing this, Xiao Qihan's weathered face revealed a look of utter terror. The base numerical figures he once disdained had become his daily nightmare. With trembling hands, he began to move the abacus beads again, his voice thick with tears. Please, don't cut my rations. I'll recalculate. I'll recalculate right now. Watching the once arrogant 6th prince now tormented into such timidity by numbers, I allowed a satisfied smile to tug at the corner of my mouth. Mistress, the water is ready. A voice, extremely humble and raspy, sounded from beside the couch. I withdrew my gaze, looking down at the person kneeling at my feet. The once gentle and refined, calculating former crown prince Mo Yuan was now dressed in the coarsest hempen rags, holding an exquisite bronze basin with both hands, the water inside filled with floating flower petals. His back was bowed in a submissive arch, and there was no longer a trace of his former arrogance or schemes in his eyes. Only the fear and submission of the tamed remain. I answered indifferently. Upon hearing my reply, Mo Yuan carefully lifted my right foot, skillfully removed my silk stocking, and placed my foot into the warm water, kneading it with the utmost gentleness. I used my jade-like foot to tilt his chin upward, forcing him to look up at me. Watching the lingering humiliation and deep dread in his eyes, I suddenly burst into laughter. My laughter echoed through the spring pavilion, sounding crisp, yet cruelly cold. I slowly drew back my foot, stood up, and walked to the pavilion's railing, looking down upon the beauty of the garden and the figures busy at work within it. Mother, the rules of survival you taught me, I have carved deep into my bones. The cruelty and bullying of this world should never have been visited upon me. If someone insists on trying, then I have no choice but to let them taste that flavor themselves.